Hello, it's Martin from Wisely Automotive. If you have been following us for a while, you probably know that we specialize in electric cars. In fact, mostly one electric car, the BMW i3. And having sold many, we also took in a lot of part exchanges, and there is one which tops the charts by far, and that has to be the Audi A2. So in today's video, we will take a look at why, despite the i3 being made some 400 kilometers away from the A2, it's probably its closest spiritual successor. The reason why the car community probably has a bit of a love-hate relationship with these cars is because they look a little bit odd, and that's all because the form follows the function. You see, the A2 was always intended as a small Audi, not a cheap one, and the proof is under the skin. Structurally, it's using the Audi space frame technology, which was very ahead of its time, using mostly lightweight aluminium in the composition of the vehicle, and the body panels have a structural load-bearing function as well. So this is probably one of the reasons why, unfortunately, the prices of these have dropped through the floor, because even a minor accident can write them off. But it means that you get a relatively functional everyday car, which even with the diesel engine is under 1 ton. In the context of the i3, aluminium is still present, but it's quite weighty. It's only utilized in the rolling chassis, which forms the structure around the high voltage battery, houses the electric motor and the suspension, but the cabin uses much more exotic materials, namely carbon fiber reinforced plastics. This was quite a challenge for BMW because this is not regular carbon fiber. With the i3 intended as a mass market car, BMW couldn't resort to the same technologies like we see in Formula One and in spacecraft. So this is a compromise of keeping all the qualities of carbon fiber but being able to scale up the production. The result is still a very lightweight car. The base model i3 comes in under 1.2 tons, and yes, that's a little bit more than the A2, but keep in mind it contains about a 250 kilogram battery pack and is built to higher safety standards. It also enables some clever features. Because of the extra rigidity in the carbon fiber shell, there is no need for a fixed B-pillar, so now that's integrated into the rear door. So despite the compact footprint, it's actually fairly easy to get passengers into the back seats. In our eyes, it's no coincidence that so many people decide to upgrade from the A2 to the i3. After all, it feels like both of these cars are on the same mission: to be as compact for daily city use, but also still practical for families. And it starts with the boot of the A2. It's a normal boot, there is not much to it, but the magic happens when you fold the seats down. So firstly, you can recline them in 2 stages. So if you want a bit more boot space, they lock into a more upright position. Funnily enough, the i3 has the same feature. But if we continue further down and push the seat all the way down, to kind of lock it into place, you can pull this handle and the base of the seat pops up. So now if you want to carry a pram or a mountain bike, you have a little bit more space and you will not get the actual seat dirty. If you want to go one step further, you will see that these are kind of open hinges at the bottom. So all you need to do is kind of wiggle the seat out, remove the entire seat. How neat is that? And you get a nice flat floor in the back now. With the second row reinstated and the front seat in my usual driving position, you will see that there is just about enough knee room, but more importantly, absolutely ample foot space. That's because Audi actually sculpted out the bottom parts of these footwells, they call it the space floor concept, to give you more room, and it really feels quite spacious for the vehicle of this class. Ironically, even the latest Porsche Taycan, which doesn't feel very spacious, follows a similar principle. There, Porsche calls it the foot garage, where Porsche takes out a section of the battery to create a deeper footwell for rear passengers. So there you have it, the A2 shares something with a £100,000 Porsche. Here in the front, the airy theme continues. You get fantastic visibility out thanks to the large windows a very spacious cabin, but at the same time, don't forget we are in a compact vehicle, which makes it very easy to navigate busy London streets and pass through with restrictors. That feeling of spaciousness is taken one notch further with the i3. There is no engine up front. In fact, the electric motor lives under the boot floor, which means that the entire cabin could be moved forward. That results in plenty of space in there for the passengers and a very short bonnet, but you still get a little bit of storage space underneath, almost like in a Tesla. We do have to be honest and say that the drivetrain choice had an impact on the boot space. It's definitely not as cavernous as the one in the A2, and there's absolutely no underfloor storage, but if you want to take bigger items you can still fold the seats down and they do lie completely flat. The interior actually feels remarkably similar to the A2. The windows are massive, letting plenty of light in, making the cabin feel nice and airy, but the differences start happening the moment you look down. Because this is an electric car, it doesn't need a center console, so BMW got rid of that, making it easier to jump out of the car even on the other side, and the floor is completely flat because there's nothing living underneath other than a high voltage battery pack. The other big difference are the materials and build quality. The i3 was higher priced at launch, even when you account for inflation between the two cars, and obviously it's a BMW and a more modern one at that. So all the things you touch, like for example the seats, the door cards and the steering wheel, are much higher quality. The innovation doesn't end there. Audi did their research and they probably correctly assumed that most people buying premium German cars are not going to be tinkering with them. So there is no longer a user openable bonnet. Having said that, it's actually quite easy to pop open. You can just release these two little latches and it will pop open. What you get instead is the service hatch, which houses the most commonly needed items. So your engine oil, the dipstick and the filler for the washer fluid. Speaking of servicing, the car featured a variable service interval, meaning it was using all of its sensors and measuring the parameters needed to determine how frequently you would need to visit the workshop. And in case of the diesel, this meant that the service visits could extend up to 2 years or 30,000 miles. These days we would probably call it AI-powered digital twinning, because the marketing department can that way extract more money from you. But it's interesting that this already happened in the 2000s. It's no surprise that the list of features on the i3 is quite a bit longer. At the end of the day, it is a younger vehicle. But just like with most premium German brands, a lot of those features were entirely optional. So every i3 is specified a little bit differently. But you could get your LED lights, parking sensors, reversing camera and so on. The one feature to point out, which basically premiered on the i3, was the Driving Assistant Plus, which was based purely on camera vision. This specific car doesn't come with it, but cars which do have a single camera mounted at the top of the windscreen looking at the road ahead to detect pedestrians and other traffic. And this is then interpreted and used for the adaptive cruise control system. And it feels like we are coming full circle with this, with, for example, Tesla dropping ultrasonic sensors and radars from their cars as well. I have to confess, I lied a little bit in the beginning of the video, because other than these cars being focused on being the best city cars, there was also this relentless stride for maximum efficiency. Obviously, the low curb weight of both helps, but both manufacturers didn't forget about aerodynamics either, so they can still keep up the pace even at the higher speeds. In fact, when the A2 was launched, it had a segment-leading coefficient of drag of 0.28. This was mostly achieved by smooth body panels, a single aerodynamically optimized windscreen wiper, flush alloy wheels with quite narrow tires, and what looks like an afterthought for the rear wing was actually carefully calculated to help that overall low drag. What does that mean for real-world efficiency? Well, we wish we could tell you, but the A2 doesn't come with a trip computer, and we couldn't be bothered to work out the math based on how much fuel we use for the distance. But on paper, the diesel A2, which was the one which grabbed all the headlines, was meant to do up to 65 miles per gallon in the combined cycle. So many owners were getting over that. However, it's important to mention that by today's standards, it's quite a stinky Euro 3. We have the petrol 1.4, which is a ULEZ compliant Euro 4. BMW decided to give the rear occupants a little bit more headroom, which results in a roofline which is not as aggressively sloping and in turn slightly worse coefficient of drag, even though this is a newer vehicle, at about 0.29 up to 0.30. So they had to work extra hard in the other areas to make up for it. It has a similarly smooth bumper and body lines, similarly aerodynamically optimized alloys, but they are even skinnier than the ones on the A2. Having sold so many, we know what they can do in the real world, and from our experience an all-year-round average is about 4 miles per kilowatt hour, and on a day like this, when the weather is quite mild and you drive gently, we got up to 5 miles per kilowatt hour without trying particularly hard. Now, what that translates to in terms of petrol engine equivalent, if we just look at how much energy is needed to move the vehicle, that would be an equivalent of 140 miles per gallon. So while many people look at electric power through the lens of saving costs, I would encourage you to look at the wider picture, because there is a lot of other benefits. The smoothness of the electric motor cannot be comparable even to the best automatic transmissions. The fact that you can precondition the cabin, meaning preheat or pre-cool depending on the season, before you get into the vehicle is a fantastic convenience feature. And if you can charge at home, you basically wake up to a full tank of electricity every single morning. In practice, you can really tell that the A2 is focused on efficiency. It's not very quick, with a 0 to 60 time of about 12 seconds. To get anything out of it, you will need to constantly shuffle through the 5-speed gearbox, and even then, hill starts, I know this is a bit of a joke in the team because I rarely drive manuals, are a challenge. There is not much low-end torque, especially on this petrol version. But by far the number one complaint we get from people trading these in is the ride comfort, because yes, the suspension does have a certain German firmness to it, but it doesn't really translate into driving dynamics. The car still kind of bobs and rolls around in corners, yet for what was primarily meant to be a city car, going over speed bumps is downright painful. The important thing to keep in mind about the i3 or electric cars in general for that matter is that they can be efficient without a compromise on performance, because if you design an electric motor right, you will squeeze out more power by increasing its efficiency, resulting in still very good consumption in day-to-day driving. And that really is the case for the i3, because look, if I get out of this roundabout and put my foot down, it picks up with no hesitation. The 0 to 60 time is in the 7-second range, which is much better. And if you are someone who has been looking to get an i3 for a while, but you were too scared about other people saying that the suspension is too stiff, well, if you had an Audi A2 before, let me tell you, this drives like a limousine in comparison. It still has that occasional bobbing sensation when you go through a bend, and the skinny tires on the front axle can give way if you take a corner a bit too enthusiastically, which results in a slightly understeery character despite the i3 being rear-wheel drive. But there's no denying that this feels a lot more refined than the A2, and now we are doing 70 miles per hour and I'm barely feeling the bumps in the road. This shouldn't come as a surprise, given the A2 features a relatively simple torsion beam rear axle, whereas the i3 has a much more sophisticated, like a premium car should have, multi-link setup. So I think that's about it. I'm sure if you wanted to explore all the nitty-gritty details, there's lots more to it, but hopefully you can appreciate how the i3 shares many design principles with the A2. And if there are any A2 owners watching, rest assured we are not trying to push you into an i3. I'm sure there are better marketing strategies to sell lots of cars and trying to advertise to a very niche customer base. But it poses the more open question about where does this leave us going forward. And we are going back from BMW to the VW group in the form of these compact MEB cars. As an example, here we have the ID.3, which again shares many design principles with these previous cars, being on a bespoke EV architecture, rear-wheel drive, which enables it to have quite a large cabin and maybe not the most attractive looks. But you can see that VW has learned from the mistakes of the A2, and the design is a lot more toned down mass market, and the sales numbers do agree, for better or for worse. So I'm afraid this is the trend nowadays of slightly more boring and safe car design, but there is still a little bit of that practical character which we saw with these earlier city cars. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it. Let us know in the comments what you think, whether you have any other ideas about cars which are good spiritual successors to the i3 and the A2. We are always keen to hear what you have to say. If you want to learn more about the i3, make sure to check out this playlist. And if you want to learn more about EVs in general, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much again, and see you in the next one.